Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. And I'm blessed to have two guests today, as opposed to my usual one. I've got Jordan here and I've got Josh, and I met both of them through my parish in Santa Rosa, St. Peter and Paul. And they also do podcasting like I do. And I was interested in getting to talk to them a little bit because I've noticed that since I've converted from Roman Catholicism to Orthodoxy, that there's a lot of male converts, but also a lot of younger men. So I was interested in hearing about how and why they converted to Orthodoxy. So thank you guys for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks for having
Yeah,
us.
thanks for having us, for sure.
Yeah,
Big fan of your show.
Oh, that's nice to you. How old are you guys?
I'm 33.
I turned 34 a couple days ago.
Okay, so you guys is that millennials?
I think so.
Yeah.
Millennials. Okay. No, were either of you born into Orthodoxy, or are you're both converts?
No, definitely not.
We're both converts, yeah.
Wow. So Jordan, what was your religious upbringing, if any?
I guess you could say I was like nominally Protestant growing up.
Hmm.
Both of my parents had pretty religious parents, my grandparents on both sides. My dad's dad was actually he was a missionary in the Plymouth Brethren. And so my dad grew up in Brazil with his family, and they did mission stuff out there.
Wow.
Something I'd like to learn a lot more about. So I did grow up with some foundation for Christianity, but I was, for the most part, I was just kind of like a worldly kid, and kind of raised by the TV and really into all the pop culture stuff. But yeah, from a young age, I definitely had at least some foundation in Christianity, and then fell away from it, and it took a while to get back.
Did your parents take you to church, or it was like going to church? Was that part of your life?
Yeah, my dad took us to a lot of different churches in the area, and none of them really stuck. It was mostly like the kind of like non-denominational sort of rock concert Protestant kind of thing. And I think he was definitely seeking for he's the one that brought me to Orthodoxy, because he discovered the bookstore in downtown Santa Rosa. I remember him bringing home like Christ the Eternal Tao and Father Seraphim Rose and all this stuff.
Wow.
And that was when I saw a huge change in him. I was in middle school at the time. And I was just like this metalhead kid. I was pretty angsty. And my dad, early on, my dad definitely struggled with alcoholism and things like that. So it was I guess a bit of a dysfunctional early childhood. But he always tried to cling to Christianity, and he was definitely seeking for a firm foundation in it. And he definitely really found it when he discovered the Orthodox bookstore and the parish in town and stuff. And that was when he completely went sober and just turned his life around, and that had a huge impact on me.
That's an awesome story. I'll give Daniel a little plug. So that's Not of This World bookstore in Santa Rosa, California. God bless him.
Yeah,
and that's a cool story. And Josh, what is your, I guess, your background? Were you raised religious or in a church?
No, I wasn't really raised religious. My grandparents on both sides were pretty Christian most of my life. My grandparents died. One died before I was born. One died when I was a kid, and they were very Christian, Catholic on one side, Protestant on the other. And as I grew up, I had my mom's mom was really Protestant, and she's very saint-like. She's definitely the reason most of my family is Christian. So that was kind of around as like a background metaphysic, but I didn't go to any church really growing up. My mom and dad split up when I was young. My mom went through a big like lesbian phase when I was a kid, so she definitely wasn't Christian. She was dating girls, that kind of thing, and the lifestyle that kind of accompanies that. And my dad was like a pro skater in the 80s, so he was kind of a rebellious figure himself, and just never really spent too much time on the bigger questions, it seemed. So not too much existential, philosophical, or religious influence from my dad or my mom. And as I got older, I ended up working at a Christian camp where I met Jordan, and he was the first person I met who was Orthodox. And there were a couple other people there who were Orthodox. So that's kind of how it started, its influence. And that was more than 10 years ago. We've known each other for a long time now.
Oh, that's cool. Where's your dad right now? I mean, is he, what happened to
My
him?
dad lives in Montana right now.
Okay.
My dad and I have a good relationship now, but yeah, he lives in Montana. So
Is it, did he have like a spiritual path or no? Or
not too much. He went to Catholic school when he was a kid, and it's quite common. A lot of the people from his generation who went to Catholic school, not Catholics, and are kind of anti-religious at some point. Yeah. And
yeah.
because he was part of the skateboarding pro skater milieu, like a lot of that comes with like punk music and a lot of like countercultural,
Okay.
like F the man kind of stuff. So that kind of went in with a lot of his friends being like, and like not really having much of a spiritual path for sure.
If you don't mind me asking about your mom, where's she? What's she doing?
My mom is in a way better place now. My mom, when I was like 12 or 13, my mom, this was after she had met a guy and kind of stopped being a lesbian or having whatever phase that was. She ended up getting married and then finding a charismatic pastor down the street who did like a garage church. So kind of she started going to that, and it ended up really changing her life. So my mom is very Christian now.
Wow.
Protestant variety, but yeah, she's in a way better place. And yeah,
she sounds like she has an interesting story. So
she has quite an interesting story. Yeah.
Cool. That's cool. I like people that kind of have gone into the sort of the gay life and then came out of it. So because people kind of think that you don't or you can't, or it's kind of the way you're born or so.
No.
And there's so many people that maybe had tried that and then did something else afterwards. So I like that. It's cool.
Yeah.
God bless her. So how long have you been Orthodox?
I'm actually a catechumen right now, so I'm not technically all the way Orthodox, but yeah, I went through a long phase. Like when I met Jordan back in the day, like more than 10 years ago, I was kind of more of a perennialist and doing like the Eastern mysticism kind of path. I was really into Alan Watts, and I got into like occultism, and I was really into Manly P. Hall and all the Eastern stuff, which made Father Seraphim Rose quite appealing when I ended up figuring he was around. And yeah, so I went through kind of a long path of like Burning Man and drug use and all, like a lot of hallucinogens and psychedelics before I got more seriously interested into Orthodoxy.
I was at one of the very, very early Burning Man. We used to have it. I forget which beach it was. Was it Baker Beach in San Francisco?
Oh, and yeah, real early ones. Yeah,
that was like the early '90s, and then later they moved it out to the desert. So you met Jordan, who was already Orthodox 10 years ago, you said? So
maybe a little more.
like, yeah, what have you been doing like the last 10 years? I mean, in terms of like religion, but you were still doing the Eastern occult mystic. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was definitely, until a couple of years ago. I mean, I haven't really done any of that stuff for 5 years or something, but I definitely went through a pretty big phase of doing Burning Man and a lot of hallucinogens and a vague Eastern mysticism. And only in the last couple of years have I taken Orthodoxy seriously.
Okay. So during that, this is interesting. So during that time, were you speaking with him about like religion or orthodoxy or no?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, we really bonded over like conspiracy stuff. That was the thing because he would always accost me with things about like UFOs and all these like fringe documentaries, and I was already into that stuff too. Um, and so that was definitely part of our like bonding experience as friends early on. And he was always really challenging, especially when it came because I was already coming from an Orthodox point of view. I remember one of our first conversations was about like, do you think there are aliens out there? And I was just into Father Seraphim and
Mm,
Orthodoxy and the religion of the future. So I was
mm.
taking the stand on aliens or demons, and uh, that was definitely one of our first debates. And it was always like it got pretty heated, but it was always really challenging and like stimulating intellectually, and that's kind of how our friendship started. So
So like during that time, Jordan, were you trying to sort of guide him towards orthodoxy, maybe just in kind of a subtle way?
oh yeah, for sure. um and I had fun, and fun might not be the best word for it, but it was, yeah, it was always engaging, and it helped me figure out where I was at with a lot of this stuff. um Especially with him coming from the more, I don't know if new age is they're just like,
Yeah, something around that for sure.
yeah, so
Mm,
I learned how to kind of dialogue with other worldviews, and I
that's
had already
good.
been into world religion before that as well. That's one of the things that really brought me to Orthodoxy was, I mean, I credit Father Damascene's book Christ the Eternal Tao with really like hammering home that Orthodoxy was the truth, um, because I had spent a lot of time learning about like comparative religion and comparative mythology. I've always loved that stuff, and the way he wove everything together with Christ as the incarnation and the fulfillment of all of these truths that you can find in the other traditions. Um, that had a big impact on me, and it definitely influenced the way I tried to dialogue with Josh and a lot of our other friends at the time.
Th- Yeah, this is good because um oh, I've had this conversation with a lot of not so much Orthodox, 'cause I'm so newly Orthodox, but I remember with a lot of Catholics, but just in Christians in particular, and they're often like conflicted about, well, how do I approach someone, or how is my relationship structured around someone who doesn't share my faith?
Hmm.
And some people take a pretty hard stand, which I understand, is that um, I'm going to tell this person what I believe and what's the truth, and if they don't accept it, I'm going to have to kind of cut off communication with them. But I think it's good what you did is like you guys have known each other for 10 years, but you just kind of kept at it. You kind of keep talking. It doesn't mean, you got to go to an ayahuasca ceremony with somebody, but you keep talking with the person while they're still on their journey, but you don't necessarily have to hit them on the head with the Bible or drag them to church with you. You just keep.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, like I said, I was early on, I was a pretty angsty kid, and I think I had certain resentments about the kind of Bible thumping attitude that I'd seen. Um, so I don't know. I'm pretty sensitive to that side of things because I can see where people come from, where they're averse to even just the idea of Christianity.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and I mean, or rediscovering the roots of Christianity in the Orthodox tradition um, made me realize how far away just the popular milieu is from from a grounding in that tradition. Like we've lost so much of that in the world today, and I, like reading about Father Seraphim and um, his struggle to find that heart that is all but, it seems to be all but lost in our times, is that had a huge impact on me. And I've I've done what I can to try to share that, as imperfectly as I do. So
Perseverance pays off, I think. Just hanging in there with people. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Not of the Daniels, Not of This World bookstore in Santa Rosa, is because when Father Seraphim had we had a bookstore, but they were also selling icons and other Orthodox items there. When he had the store there, I think it was on Geary, in the 60s, there were a lot of stories of people wandering in there. And I think Father Alexei Young was one of them, was people going in there. And it was usually Father Seraphim that they encountered. And he did a lot of conversions through that store. It's pretty amazing. The people that came in there,
yeah,
looked at the icons in their front window and then walked in and ended up becoming Orthodox. You
yeah,
never know, how it's gonna happen.
absolutely. I mean, at Daniel's store, they used to do cafe every Friday night. They don't do it anymore, sadly.
Yeah.
I guess hopefully we can bring it back at some point, but they used to just open up the store Friday evenings, make free drinks. They had an espresso machine, and people would just come in, a lot of people off the street. But I remember Josh coming in, and
I think it was the first time I met a priest. Yeah, I went in there to just kind of see what it was about, and I was really impressed that he knew a lot of like conspiratorial stuff that I was interested in. Like he knew how the money printing like happens across the world, with like the difference between like lawful money and fiat currencies, and like the IMF and the World Bank. Like I remember being really impressed that this like priest in a full priest garb knew all of this stuff, and it kind of blew my mind and really impressed me.
It's kind of cool that I don't know if Jay Dyer's had a lot to do with that, but it seems like that a lot of Orthodox people are very in tune with what's going on in the world. They're not really. One of the things about traditional Catholicism that I tended to have an issue with was it had a real Father Seraphim used this term. It had kind of a fortress mentality where people, and I understand why they do that, is because the world is pretty messed up. So when you find a safe sort of home for you and your kids that seems protected, or at least guarded from the madness that's going on, you tend not to engage in the world, like what's going on, and people were very disconnected. And I go, well, that can be good because you're not being affected by all that or influenced by it, but also, I don't know, you kind of are in a drift in a sea, that you're upon, but you really don't understand it. So that I mean that's not good. And I've seen with Orthodox people, a lot of them is they are really engaged with a lot of things that's going on. They're pretty knowledgeable about, I would say, like current events, world issues, and like because I'm fascinated with pop culture too, like Jordan was saying. So I think that's good. So you got to have a balance. You can't. I mean, what's from Scripture? Be of the world, but not in the world.
in the
You
world,
know?
but not of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. No, I totally relate to all of that. And
Yeah.
yeah, and Jay Dyer has definitely been an inspiration for us. I wasn't really aware of him until like Josh brought him up to me. He's like, "Have you seen this Orthodox guy like bashing people in debates and stuff?"
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen him before, but and at first I wasn't super into it, but I saw a few videos, especially his debate with, I think it was Shabir Ali,
Hmm.
where I was really impressed with his just his debate skills in that. And then like all of his geopolitical stuff, like his Elite book series is
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, he's done amazing work showing from like primary sources that a lot of these things that people think are just fringe, like kooky
Yeah.
conspiracy theories, the people behind them are pretty open with their intentions and goals and stuff, and I think that's, I mean, that's an indispensable resource for sure to be
Yeah.
able to be aware
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. What's impressed me a lot about him is that because I've been into Hollywood and movies and things, and he really thinks and wrestles with the material in a different way that I like. And it's unusual to see that in a religious person
Mhm.
because again, like I think pop culture is kind of disregarded, maybe as a thing of the devil or not something serious. I had this. You guys are a lot younger than me, but I had this problem when I was doing a lot of writing about pop culture because I wanted to talk about Madonna, the singer, because I think she had a big influence in a lot of things. I think a lot of the stuff that's going on now, I think directly came from her, but people kind of in the religious sort of sphere or religious space, I think they thought that a discussion of something like that's not worthy. But I think what's good that Jay has done is I think that it's actually he's made it an intellectually like honest conversation that you can have about that kind of stuff like movies and music and art and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And if I can do a shameless plug, I do have a project called Metal Mystic where
Oh,
I wanted to do something similar with that because, like I said, I grew up listening to a lot of metal music, and since becoming Orthodox and studying all this stuff, I became pretty sensitive to the occult undertones of a lot of my favorite artists. So I've made, I only have 2 videos up right now, one on King Diamond and one on Ronnie James Dio about their dabblings in occultism, and I tried to break it down using a lot of Father Seraphim, a lot of Orthodox saints and stuff. Um, these little mini documentaries, but I mean I have memories of my dad showing me like some Protestant documentaries about, I think there was one called like Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll or something like that, where it was, they were trying to expose like heavy metal as like the devil's music and all of that stuff, and people look back on it now and they say, oh, that was just satanic panic, just like fundamentalist BS, but there was something to it. The way they presented it could get pretty goofy,
yeah.
and not, and like you were saying, there was something about it that wasn't really intellectually serious, or at least it didn't come off that way. And
Mhm.
for me it actually made me feel like it was, all that stuff was cool.
Yeah.
And it made me want to listen to it more. So I've set out trying to, yeah, do like a more serious breakdown, like inspired by Jay's work definitely, and a lot of other writers that have come across. um,
Mhm.
and we try to do that on our podcast too. Synaxis podcast, it's become kind of a pop culture critique sort of thing,
Mhm.
where we look at, you know, some of the things that we're interested in. Like we recently just had an episode on Grant Morrison, the comic book writer, who was another influential artist on me growing up. And so we kind of went into his background with chaos magic and his ideas about putting magic spells in comic books for people to read and things like that. And I think it's important to, for
Wow.
people to know about that kind of
Yeah.
thing for sure. So
Yeah, because especially when parents have kids that get into that and they don't know what's going on. So
mhm.
Yeah.
yeah, I see. I grew up. I'm a lot older than you. I grew up in the '80s, and I wasn't in the heavy metal music, but I remember like uh Motley Crue that
Mhm.
had like all these sort of satanic symbolism in high school. I remember seeing that and I was like, oh, this is interesting. So that
Yeah.
that kind of kept going on. But then I remember like it seemed like in the 80s the heavy metal scene kind of progressed to people like Poison that was like kind of glam. I don't know if you remember them.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they wore a lot of makeup. And then when I got really into music was like in the grunge scene of the early 90s
Mm.
with like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains or whatever, but or Smashing Pumpkin. Their music I thought was really intelligent, but also very angry, and it appealed to me at the time. So
Hmm.
I think a lot of that music has an anger level that appeals to people, especially if they're going through a time of angst.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
because I mean, Kurt Cobain, God rest his soul. I mean, he essentially just screamed. So and I did get to see him live, but he just screamed. But it was appealing to me at the time because I don't know why I was angry, but I don't know. Young people are just angry, but angry at their parents, the world, the way they were raised, everything. So
Yeah, I was
yeah,
the same way. I was more I was more attracted to, like I said, I did a video on like King Diamond, Ronnie James Dio. Like there's like this escapism and like fantasy to some of the elements that they brought in. I didn't gravitate towards grunge as much because I think it was I found it just kind of depressing in a lot of ways. But like the 80s metal stuff, there's like a funness to it, or like horror movies. I was into horror movies too. Like there's like a veneer of like playfulness around
yeah,
it. Um, but
yeah,
there's definitely just a lot of darkness behind it as well. So
yeah. I don't know like modern bands. Probably the last one that I looked at was like Ramstein. Are you
oh
familiar with
yeah.
Oh
them?
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But I not so much for the music that I looked at it, but just because like it was very visually interesting. It seemed it kind of seemed like why people were attracted to those like Viking films and that Viking miniseries. I don't know if that's still on because it was like a very um the presentation was dark, but not but like in a sort of medieval dark ages kind of thing. But
Mhm.
then it was like hyper masculine. So I go, well, I guess I know why people are attracted to this. So I don't know about the modern rock scene what it's like, but that it seemed like that was the appeal to them. So
Yeah. No, I don't think it's that much different. I don't follow too many newer bands either. There's a big one called Ghost
yeah,
that they have very satanic imagery and really blasphemous. I mean, it's kind of based on parodying like Catholic aesthetics. So
okay,
they used to have their front man used to dress up as a pope, but with like a skull face and stuff. And their music is structured like pop music. They take a lot of influences from like ABBA and stuff like that, but
really, wow,
but they sing more. I mean, if you listen to the lyrics, they're all like hymns to Satan, and it's just really blatantly um, religiously satanic. But that also has like this veneer of playfulness and like horror movie aesthetic, where it's kind of tongue in cheek, and we don't actually believe this stuff. We're just doing it for entertainment purposes. But and that's one band that I've gotten a lot of requests to do a breakdown on, which I have plans for.
are you okay?
Um,
I'm gonna have to look at it now. Good. I can look at it. It kind of sounds like Little Nas or something because he does all that stuff too. With
yeah, I think so. I don't follow him too much, but from what I've seen, it's definitely a similar kind of thing.
he does a lot of the Catholic. See, again, Madonna started all that because
Yeah.
she had a people freaked out. I forget the year. It was like you guys weren't even born. 89 or 90. She did that video for Like a Prayer that I
Hmm.
wrote about in my book that had all this sexual, weird, cult, a Catholic imagery. And now, over 30 years later, people are still kind of going back to that and messing with it because let me get maybe especially Josh, because he used to be involved with the occult. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but yeah. So I think a lot of this stuff that like Little Nas or whoever, this other group we call Ghost or whatever, that they play with, whether it's traditional sort of Christian ritual, that people have an instinctual longing towards that. And I think that's why, because those sort of like rock videos or whatever, or however a rock band or a singer presents, their public image, I don't think it's haphazard. Like they just wake up in the morning and say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to play with, Catholic or whatever traditional Christian imagery. It's very thought out.
Hmm.
And it's for a reason, because it appeals to people on a very subliminal level. And the argument that I've made, and I think that Madonna is very smart and she figured it out, is that in modern society, and especially in a lot of religion, especially Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, but not Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy, sort of the mystic tradition has been stripped away. So people don't have access to that. So it's provided in specifically music, and where these musicians play with that imagery. So that's why it's popular. So what do you think about that? That's my theory.
No, I think that's spot on, because I mentioned earlier I did a video on King Diamond.
Oh, King Diamond. I've heard of King Diamond.
He was a really influential metal artist, but he's kind of underground because his voice isn't too appealing to a lot of people. And he's got this very, very blatantly satanic imagery. Like, he was one of the first people that did what they call corpse paint, with like the black and white distorted features and everything. And he was very vocally into like Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan and stuff. And I make a point in that video to say, like, for all of their outward veneer of like rational atheism, they're still acting out this innate desire to have some kind of religious experience. And so that, like, I mean, like Anton LaVey, he just parodied Christianity with everything he did, and he just did it backwards, and wore all the robes.
I met him, yeah.
Oh,
You did?
Wow.
I did.
Wow.
At the Black, what did he used to call that place? The Black Mansion?
The Black House?
Black House show.
Yeah.
I did. He was I don't know. At that time, he wasn't like wearing the cape or anything. He just had a suit on,
Sure.
So, yeah, I don't know. I didn't think much about it at the time because I was into that stuff, and I was like, oh, it's Anton, and he was in San Francisco and lived there.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's no big deal. But you're exactly right. Is that the Black Mass was a reversion of the Catholic Mass. So a lot of these occult practices, I mean, if I remember correctly, they utilize or they co-opt a lot of this symbolism and ritual from other religions, normally Christian, but sometimes Eastern stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
So the practitioners of that sense the power of symbolism. I don't hate that word symbolism. They co-opt they see the power of ritual and how people, want to partake in that. But then it's weird. It's kind of stripped of meaning, but it seems like in especially the music industry, it becomes just sort of like sexualized, and that's it. So,
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
that brings to mind, I mean, one of the biggest figures that seems to be like influential in like occult music circles is Aleister Crowley. Like you can't get away from that guy. And I seem to remember reading that he spent a lot of time in Russia and based his Gnostic mass on the Divine Liturgy.
Wow.
And it's it's so incredibly backwards and blasphemous, but I mean that's there you have that, just that parody of the truth, and it's all structured as like a negation of something, but it doesn't offer really anything of itself. It's all just a distortion of something that's already there.
Yeah.
um,
I didn't know that about him. What's the famous quote that he has that Beyonce's husband, I can't remember his name,
oh, do
used?
what thou wilt.
Yeah, do it that well, that
Yeah.
they were marketing that as like a slogan on like
On Jay-Z's, yeah, on his
yeah,
merch,
like
yeah.
rock away.
t-shirts or hoodies or whatever. So but people and I kind of people haven't figured this out or don't or can't. Is it because I noticed this when I was a young teenager and then like in my early 20s into the new age, because a lot of this stuff that they spout in the new age is kind of like old, like doctors of the church stuff. And like I'm hearing it for the first time. I'm like, oh, this is like profound. These people are coming up with this stuff. But then a lot of like young people, especially too, see a lot of this stuff in music, and because they grew up in like stripped down Roman Catholicism or stripped down, well, Protestantism is inherently stripped down, but so they see it and go, oh, this is incredible, this is something new and great, but they don't realize that it's been around for a long time, and then these people have actually manipulated it too. So
Hmm.
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, like 100%.
I'm oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the thing that you brought up about humans, like I don't know how you say it, like seeking for transcendence and ritual. It was one of the things that really resonated when I first went to Burning Man, because seeing all these people who were either atheistic or secular, or some kind of agnostic, really take part in the ritual of like the burning of the man in the temple.
Yep.
Like I watched all these secular people I knew who kind of would like poo-poo on any religious sense go and cry while walking through a temple and reading like meaningful things that people, I don't know if you know about, if when you went this was a part of Burning Man at that time, but yeah, people will go and they'll write things. So someone will have died in their life, like their parents, and they'll write like a letter to their dad who may have killed themselves or whatever it happened to be, and watch people go through and like write something meaningful to them or someone they love, and then watching it burn away. And it, like, I could see how it was in a sense like a transformative ritual, and it was like a religious ritual for people who had never really engaged in religion. And it really struck me that like humans deeply yearn for certain kinds of rituals and psychological transformation, and that if secular society doesn't give it to people, they're going to seek it out in whatever form they can. And Burning Man ends up being one of the modern forms.
Yeah, what impressed me too about Burning Man, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but is that especially when it moved from San Francisco out to the desert there in Nevada, is it was a hardship to get there. People had to make like a pilgrimage to get there. So it's like a pilgrimage. So we're going, we're going on a spiritual journey here, but we're also physically, doing this.
And it's kind of hard, especially in the desert. It's kind of hard. It's hot, and it's kind of a team struggle. It puts you through like a collective trial, and through the end of it, it kind of like bonds your group.
I was going to get to that. And then once you're there, you read my mind. Once you're there is a time of privation. Yeah. There's a time of suffering, and there's a time of, except like those celebrities come in their big buses, or trailers, but you have to endure something, and then the denouement or whatever, the highlight is the ritual. So it's very much pseudo-Christian, event.
Yeah.
So but people don't. I don't think people figure that out. I think it's. I think with the New Age too. I think a lot of things that are actually old and ancient are presented as new, and I think Americans are generally pretty uneducated in terms of history in general, but very much in terms of like spiritual, the spiritual quest through the ages. They don't understand it. To them, it's like all new. So, and something that they, you know, find fascinating or whatever. But and Josh too, I wanted to ask you is that when when I was involved in sort of a spiritual quest, I compare it to like I like all the Arthurian stuff. So the search for the Holy Grail, and it seems like the further you get, it keeps pushing back. You keep like going, and you never quite reach it. And then when I was in that space, I finally sort of felt that everything that it offered was essentially like empty, because it's kind of, again, it's the opposite. And Jordan mentioned this with LeVay. It's kind of like the opposite of a Christian understanding of the world, because in the occult it seems like you're your own god and you could do whatever you want. And then when you get there and you've done everything that there is to do, it's kind of like what's left. And I don't know if I think it's in the Brothers Karamazov, but Dostoevsky talks about freedom leading to slavery. And it's I kind of got to that point where all of this not freedom, but all this opportunity to explore, spiritually and physically and all these different things, it left me essentially with a void and the same empty feeling that I had when I started the journey. So I was wondering did you kind of have that experience where you kind of went, well, what am I doing? I'm not getting anything out of this that I want.
Yeah, at a certain time, for sure. I remember like early psychedelic use definitely seemed like I was always getting something out of it. I would have like profound kinds of experiences and really bonding kinds of things with friends, and I had my share of like bad trips and like things happening in a group of people that were like kind of traumatic when it happened, and it was like a big trial. But yeah, after enough of that, it becomes something that it was like diminishing returns, just like anything else. It was the things that I was seeking, I wasn't finding in it, and it just didn't seem like one of those patterns that was maintainable. Like especially having my dad be like a pro skater and seeing his friends at like 60 like die of drug overdoses and still live like a kind of rage party life. Like I have a lot of friends who are still doing Burning Man. That like we went a long time ago, and their whole life has morphed around. Like Burning Man becomes like a religion. Their whole life is around Burning Man, and their whole year is planned around. It's like their Christmas or their New Year, and yeah, it was just the kind of thing that quickly didn't have what I was searching for. But it is a replacement. But if you're a modern person and you don't really have any sense of community or tribe, you really find something in there that is sincere. You find other seekers who are seeking after truth. Like a lot of the people I would do hallucinogens with were people who were genuinely like seeking after God and trying to figure out what's going on in the universe. So like I was really sympathetic to that. And to people who don't have a tribe, like that becomes a way that you have a rites of passage. You have like a big experience that kind of turns you into an adult. It's this bonding group thing. And yeah.
That's it. That's very, very true. People need to hear that. Yeah, because I got into a lot of subcultures, and people think, wow, it's especially like if you get in like the body modification stuff, you see these people and like, wow, that is super weird. But, and it is, but you're right. The 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 um the impression that I got from a lot of these people is they were very much, on a journey, trying to figure something out. And the path they took is not what a lot of us would take, but that's the one it was. And I guess when you get to know the people, it's not so easy to demonize them as being just, evil or wayward or lost. And what the other thing that I wanted to ask you too is that it tends to be when people are left unsatisfied or restless because of how they're seeking, whether it's enlightenment or whatever, or happiness or peace, they tend to double down and things get a little more intense. Did you do that? It's like it's either, I'm going to take I don't know, who's that mushroom guy? Used to call it that. Yeah, I used to take a, what did, not mega dose or something. What did he used to call
A
that?
heroic dose. Yeah.
Yes, that's
grams.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, so people tend to get bigger,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did a lot of hallucinogens, and like I did ayahuasca and ceremony like a couple years with a bunch of like perennialists and Buddhists, but I definitely was one of those people that I never really sought out those kinds of things. So like, yeah, I had a bunch of people offer me DMT to try to go meet transforming machine elves, and there was always something about that was intuitively like, yeah, no thanks. So yeah, I definitely wasn't one of those people who was just racing to have the max dose that I could have. So I feel, yeah, thank God for that.
You had boundaries, because I did.
Yeah.
When I was young, I was like, yeah, let's go for it, and that's kind of the sad thing, because some of these people, yeah, push it to the edge and then they go over.
Yeah, and I'd known some people too who at a young age, like, or that by the time I had met them, they hadn't done any drugs because, when they were younger, they had a bad mushroom trip at like 15 or 16, and it really like set their life off course for many years. They were on antipsychotic drugs, and it was like a big deal. So I knew people whose lives had been like really negatively affected by hallucinogens. So I definitely always tried to take a more responsible view. Not like you can be completely responsible with things like hallucinogens, but I definitely tried to study and learn about things before I would jump into them.
it's a little scary. This is a detour, but that's a little scary, especially with young people, is that those sort of substances are, I mean, I know they're still illegal, but it seems like they've entered the mainstream, because like, we didn't have a lot of those things. Like we had like LSD, but in those days, if you did that, that was like, oh, okay, you're like really adventurous. But now it's kind of like, I don't want to say passe, but it's more common. And
It's way more common.
Yeah, that's concerning to me, because it's not like, well, I don't think that marijuana is something that you should play around with either. And that's kind of like, well, just smoking a cigarette now. But yeah, the thing with the hallucinogenics, I'm like, you can really like not, you can not come out of it, or you can come out of it, like you said, traumatized. So, oof, I don't know, it's messed up. It's messed up. I was, because when I used to do outreach a lot to LGBT people, I remember talking to a nurse. She worked in sort of like public health or public welfare, and I was talking to her about some of her work and how she was, outreaching to young people. And she worked in San Francisco, but she also worked up in Santa Rosa and up in Guerneville. And gosh, she was describing young people that were like getting up at noon and then like smoking a lot of pot and doing drugs, going to bed, and just that was their life. It's just sleeping a lot, doing drugs. And I was like, wow, that's not cool. And that's not just a few people, that's a lot, she said. So
yeah,
they're just burned out. So that's because I think, again, I think modern societies not offering something that they're seeking, or that they're trying to dull a lot of pain that doesn't seem to want to go away. So I think a lot of young people have been hurt and kind of brutalized, and they don't know what to do. So I do feel sorry for them. So
Yeah, and as long as society doesn't like offer them something meaningful to be a part of, like they're gonna seek it, and that almost inevitably comes through things like subcultures and smaller, things like Burning Man. And so as long as like the more atomized and atheistic society gets, I think it's just people are gonna just more and more try to like reach for forms of transcendence, which in the modern age is gonna be things like drug use, because it's so easy for someone to have an experience taking a bunch of drugs where you know it's harder to be part of a community and be a good person and have meaningful connections with people than it is to sit in your room and do a heroic dose of drugs.
yeah, or a lot of these young people are just told, well, you're gay, or actually you're the wrong sex or something. So I think they're giving false prescriptions for a false diagnosis. So, anyway, I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but and then the one thing that I wanted to move on to, because what seems so countercultural about Orthodoxy is Orthodoxy is like a serious religion. It's demanding. It asks a lot of you. You can't just kind of pop in on Sunday once in a while and say, "Oh, I'm here, love me." So, you really need to be all in. I think that's my impression. But so it's very antithetical to the way the world and a lot of young people are moving. So it's like, because it seems like, when I was young, happiness involved just embracing freedom and the the ability, but the opportunity to just do whatever you wanted, when you wanted, with who you wanted, whatever. So that was happiness, freedom. But then, as I got older and I had experienced freedom, and like Dostoevsky said, it leads to slavery. And I wanted structure in my life, and I wanted something, to build sort of a foundation to build upon. And that's what I think Orthodoxy brought me in. And as kind of like my patron has been Father Seraphim Rose, is it his path to Orthodoxy seemed very similar, as it kind of tried a lot of different things. Is He was raised, I don't want to say nominally Christian, because he was definitely raised Christian, but I don't think I, from reading his stuff, it seems like he looked back his Christian upbringing as being somewhat milk toast. There wasn't a lot there, you know. So he went on this journey that took him to all these different places and all these different directions. Then he finally landed on Orthodoxy, like I have, and you guys have. So it's kind of like, what have you found in Orthodoxy that seems to be the antidote to the world? That's a big question. But hey, let's try it.
Well, you just got me thinking about the the freedom leads to slavery, and I hadn't made this connection before, but like I said, my early life, my dad struggled with alcoholism,
Mm,
and I think there was something like experiencing him struggling with that gave me a sense uh of that, like the idea that these pleasures can become vices that destroy you. And I remember, I don't think I had a very firm understanding of what sin really is.
Hmm.
And I started to get an idea for it actually when I was in a world religion class at the junior college, and we were going through Hinduism and Buddhism and the ideas of like desire is bound up with suffering, and
Hmm.
I think those that gave me a dimension uh that I didn't have before being brought up just like nominally Protestant. And I don't even think the idea of sin really ever came up anywhere any of the churches I went to.
Hmm.
Um, but uh, and then like I said, reading like Christ the Eternal Tao, and there's a whole section in there about um watchfulness of thoughts and not and being able to not identify with with everything that comes into your mind, and trying to like through the grace of God, trying to recognize when there are harmful ideas coming into your head and rejecting them. Um, and that discipline of being able to recognize something that's harmful and to try to not attach yourself to it was definitely a huge thing. And just like the practical aspect of that, I had no spiritual training whatsoever. And then reading that was like, oh, this is something that you can do. It definitely like broke open my mind in a way that was really important for me. So
Hmm. Hmm. So, so it so what you were, so what, I think what you're describing is sort of a way to not temper, but a way to, I don't like the word control either, but a way to sort of manage your thoughts and sort of
mhm.
parse them. Is that what you're describing? Kind of parse them out. This is this is sort of a healthy thought, and well, this is maybe not so healthy or destructive thought. Is that what you're describing?
I think so. Yeah, like
Okay,
a kind of a yeah, a self discipline and a self awareness
that's
for
it.
sure.
That's it. Because I think that a lot of times the the sort of the mantra in, or not a mantra, but sort of the dogma of modern society is that your feelings, are very important. So how you feel, kind of defines your truth. So if you have this feeling, it's something that should be, encouraged and fostered no matter how. I think people, I guess what I'm trying to say is people have a difficult time discerning. I like the word discerning something that's good and something that's not good, or something that's good for them or not good for them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And so, uh, so your dad, that I find this really fascinating too, because I like the interconnection of faith in the family. So your dad became Orthodox before you.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was about 13 at the time, and it took. I was
Oh,
baptized. I was baptized at age 18.
wow.
Um, and it took a while to warm. It took a while for me to warm up to it. But it's. I mean, yeah, he brought home like Christ the Eternal Tao was a big thing for me. Like I said, and Father Seraphim Rose.
What was it in
Um,
that book? Can you say specifically, because you've mentioned it several times? I've skimmed. So what is, could you, in case there's somebody out there that wants to read it, could
yeah,
could you say, like, what was it? What was like the the pearl or something that you found in that book?
I think it was
If
just like the holistic way that Father Damascene treats um the other traditions in the world,
hmm.
especially Taoism, but like the way he looked at the heart of this Eastern religion that I didn't know much about, but I remember my dad told me about Christ's Eternal Tao, and then later on when I took that world religion class and we got to the section on Taoism, um, there was just something about the spirit of it that reminded me of what I guess I had intuited Christianity should be from whatever it was I learned from like my parents and grandparents. But and then I remembered, oh, my dad told me about this book. Maybe I should read it. And then when I read that, and saw the way that Father Damascene just kind of illuminated how Christ fulfills all of the things that were in that tradition, and embodies them. And then, by extension, anything else I thought that was true and good about, like Hinduism or Buddhism, like Christ is the personification, he is the truth. And I think that Father Damascene's however, the the way he presented all of that was just so compelling to me. And it just kind of broke open my heart and mind.
I like
Yeah, I was
that.
really influenced by that book as well because I was really into Taoism when I was younger because I did a kind of kung fu that mixed with like qigong and like breathing exercises, and my teachers were Taoists. So I kind of just learned a way of thinking like passively through being around them that is heavily rooted in Lao Tzu and Taoism and like yang and yin and cosmological principles and stuff. And then seeing Christ the eternal Tao, it made Orthodoxy and Christianity make a lot more sense. And yeah, it's definitely a very influential book for me.
Wow. Oh, well, I'm gonna have to take a second look at it. Well, one other thing too, I wanted to ask you, um, Jordan. When your dad converted to Orthodoxy, did he like say to you, "Well, you're coming to church with me now"? Did he
Yeah.
like say, "Oh, did he?"
Yeah, he did. He was really trying. Me and my siblings. He wanted us to have some some kind of Christian influence in our lives, and he was trying his best. I think he didn't really even know how to do it. But when he started going to church, he brought us to liturgy a couple times, and I was very averse to it at first. Looking back, like I remember being like creeped out by the icons and like just feeling it just felt all so foreign to me, as like this angsty 13-year-old kid. And so I I definitely resisted it for a while. Um, but like I said, I warmed up to it, and I think one of the most formative memories in my mind that brought me into accepting Orthodoxy was when my grandma died, and
Oh,
so we went down. Uh, she lived in Southern California, and we drove down there, and I ended up inheriting her car. So
oh,
my dad and I drove back home together, and he was telling me about the stuff he read in Soul After Death, by Father Seraphim,
yeah.
like the teachings of the church on the afterlife and how we should keep her in our prayers because she's experiencing like he talked about like the first 40 days of of after the after death experience where the church teaches that you're guided by your guardian angel through heaven and hell, and you're shown all of these things, and just the detail with which he spoke about it, and like the conviction about like praying for her soul and everything was something that really like warmed my heart. And and just the idea that they have these concrete teachings about what happens, I had never heard anything like that before.
Mm.
um and so that really like sparked my interest in it, and that was when I started reading all the Orthodox stuff I could get, and mostly Father Seraphim. I read his biography shortly after that, and I mean, yeah, he's a huge figure for me, and we I think Daniel was the one that said like he's the um, patron saint of lost Westerners,
Mm.
and I I think that's really
Yeah, it
apt.
feels relatable. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. I've said that I can't think of another figure in Orthodoxy that has transcended Orthodoxy as much as him. And what I mean by that is that he's come along and people outside of Orthodoxy know who he is. And I haven't seen that with another person. So I think that has to do, well, he's American born and he's a California native, but I think it has to do with his life that it was so, I think it was so typical for a lot of people, especially nowadays, that they're so hungry for like truth and meaning. So I think they can relate to him on that level. But I think his writings, like again, like I was talking about Jay Dyer, is it some of I warn people that some of the references that Father Seraphim uses sometimes can be dated. Like he's talking about Jonestown and UFOs and the Hare Krishnas, which was much more, pertinent, back in those days. But he's like wrestling with real problems and real issues and like the material world that he was living in. I think that appeals to people because I think sometimes monastics in particular, people can read them and it seems very far removed from their everyday experience. It's like, I can't relate to this, but there's something like very relatable about Father Seraphim that's appealing to people, and it's still appealing to people, which is cool because he's been dead for what, 30 years.
40.
Yeah, 40.
Yeah, you're at the repose.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I relate to all that, and it makes me think about, like, I mean, his book Nihilism. All of his books were huge for me, but Nihilism seemed to just so starkly diagnose the state of the world, and I feel like he did such a great job with that because he lived through the entire dialectic that he maps out, like starting with liberalism and going through vitalism and then all the way to the nihilism of destruction.
Yep.
Like he really grappled with trying to figure out the truth of things, and it brought him really low, and that was when he struggled with God the most, and he finally ended up meeting St. John Maximovich, and I definitely revere him as a saint. I think he will be canonized, and I have a lot of respect for him. I really, yeah, he's really important to me for sure.
I agree. Josh, what drew you? It's kind of the same question I had for George. What drew you to Orthodoxy? Because you had been, you were old, you're older, and you kind of have been used to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of living your own life, exploring what you wanted to. But now you're entering this pretty rigorous religion that's going to be pretty demanding of what you can do and what you can't do. So, why go there?
What you were talking about earlier in the freedom leads to slavery thing felt it resonated quite a bit, because not only did I do Burning Man stuff, but I was part of like pretty intense libertarian circles where kind of the rules were, if you just don't, like general golden rule, like don't mess with people and you can do whatever you want. And, it's not a fulfilling, meaningful way to live your life, where you just try to fulfill your wants and needs, and you drug use, and you're not really part of a community. And and the more I've always sought after truth and some connection with God, and the more I learned about it, the less appealing the Eastern mysticism that I was into was. And and Jordan's always been a good friend, and seeing how Orthodox people act in the world, and especially going to a parish now and seeing the community there, like I couldn't imagine not being Orthodox now. But yeah, it's also there was the big masculine presence of Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is masculine, and my dad wasn't really around when I was a kid. He was off being pro skater man, so I didn't have like the best masculine kinds of influence, and I've definitely found it in Orthodoxy.
Okay, but I kind of kept you guys long enough. Let me see. Oh, can we talk about that just a little bit? Because that interests me, because I mean, I've always been interested, especially with my LGBT work, is that because there's a confluence there with fatherlessness or fatherless father neglect or father abandonment. I'm interested in what draws men to Orthodoxy, because I hear men say, well, it's a masculine kind of male-centered religion, but how do you perceive that? I think let me just tell you real quick, because I don't want to talk too much. Is it from my background in Roman Catholicism, and it's not the traditional sense of it with Latin and incense and bells. Um, my experience with Roman Catholicism is typical for most Americans or Westerners. Is that it's fairly, I would say the liturgy is fairly Protestant. The churches are pretty stripped down, and the priest tends to be like a facilitator, not, I mean, because in education you hear that a lot about we're facilitating. Not that there's somebody that's, I hate the word in charge, but there's somebody that's what's a good word? Not in control, but somebody that's the head of it, somebody that is like the father, somebody that the head of the church or the household, whatever. The priest tends to facilitate a lot of these moving parts, which is a lot of female involvement, lectors, Eucharist ministers, and in Catholicism, they consider the Eucharist the body and blood of Christ, actual body and blood, not like in Protestantism, but women, lay people are allowed to distribute communion. And it's a very female-centered faith and the religion, where they've included holding hands at the liturgy, which I always found kind of not cool. I didn't like that. Sometimes hugging, very emotional. And when I got to Orthodoxy, it seemed much more, not stiff, but it seemed more regimented, less. It's also in Roman Catholicism, especially after Vatican II, there's a lot of room for innovation, or for the priest to kind of make it up on the fly, to sort of like include things or take things out, where in Orthodoxy you don't have that. Very set, very structured, very disciplined. And I don't know why I would equate that with a masculine attribute, but I did. And it seems like that is why I found it to be very masculine. So I'm just curious what you think, why, because Josh, you said that was one of the things. So what in it struck you as particularly masculine? So.
A lot of what you said, the order and the structure of it. There is like a mystical, emotional part of Orthodoxy for sure, but there's also like a rational and logical part, especially in a lot of the church fathers. And I was always pretty into philosophy, so I've always liked the idea of engaging and thinking about how God works, even if there's a transcendent aspect you can't understand. The kinds of religion, at least when my mom got into Protestantism when I was like 13 or 14, it was a very feminine, emotional, couldn't really explain a lot, deeply felt and sincere, but not the kind of thing that appealed to me, being rational and wanting to understand how it works. And that's definitely there in the church fathers. So it gives me something to like look at that is rational and logical and tries to use metaphysical categories and explain them. And yeah, and also, like you said, the structure and rigidness, or not rigidness, but like the structure and order of it. It's non-random. It's hierarchical. Men and women play different roles, and especially having grown up and not having my dad really be around, and my mom being a lesbian and having a bunch of girlfriends, like I didn't really see like an ideal form of that. But then going to liturgy, I do see an ideal form of how men and women interact and with each other, and more of like the right human order.
I like that. And Father Seraphim talked about the charismatic movement and its influence. And the charismatic movement was very hyper emotional. And I think it tends to appeal to women. And I think, and he was talking in the 70s, and I think we've seen where the charismatic phenomena is kind of, it certainly got into Catholicism, which, and I think as if I can just like show the mentioned example of altar girls. Like in Catholicism, usually servers were only males or boys. And then they moved to altar girls. And it seems like as women became more involved and became more vital roles in the liturgy, men left. So that's another. Can you say anything about what we're talking about, Jordan? Anything?
Well, the thought occurred to me that yeah, there's definitely that stability of like the masculine side of things, but also the feminine side is also I don't know how to put it. It's both polarities are represented in, I guess, the most fitting way. Uh, I feel like I lack the the terms to say this thought, but because I'm thinking about the iconostasis, and we have Christ and the Theotokos there, and those are the two ideal forms, I guess you might say, of masculinity and femininity, and I feel like you see that reflected, especially in the liturgy and in the community, because I mean, it's easy, especially in a world of kind of feminism and anti-masculinity, or however you want to say that. It's easy to kind of overcorrect and say, like, almost reactionarily being, I don't know, I don't want to say misogynistic, but like it comes off that way to some people on the outside, but I feel like both the males and females, especially in our community, they have these vital roles to play, and but they're very different, and they work like complementary opposites. I mean, like there's so many women in our community that take on these really vital roles, and I don't know, there's just a balance to it that it's hard for me to describe, but I think I'm making sense.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you make perfect sense. Two things that struck me. Yes, when you walk into an Orthodox church, you're going to see a lot of images of Mary. And then in the liturgy, what one of the things that was remarkable is that the only person that's mentioned more than the Mother of God is Jesus. She's mentioned a lot in the liturgy, and that I can't remember because Roman Catholicism is always thought of as being very Marian, but she's not mentioned that much if I look back in the Catholic liturgy, but she's mentioned a lot in the Orthodox. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. So I think that's the balance that you're talking about there. And I just think that men, I think in particular, what Josh was saying really resonated with me, is I think there's a lot of men that, and I'm certainly one of them, that grew up kind of at a loss and not really having a strong masculine male figure. And they are in Orthodoxy. And one of the things that I think is example, and I think that's why Jordan was a good example to you, Josh, is that there's just individual men that have a good example to other men. Because one of the things that I saw in Orthodox is it's like men are not afraid to be pious, and kind of you don't see that in other religions, because I think men sometimes in general think to be openly pious is kind of like weak or gay, where in Orthodoxy you see that. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. So that men aren't afraid to show their religious side or their piety in public. So
Yeah.
cool. Anything else you guys want to talk about? I've kept you too long.
I mean, there are so many places we could go, but it's hour and a half seems like a good run time.
Long
um,
time.
I'm definitely starting to lose some energy, but it's been great.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. You guys are good examples. This is the way that I think conversion happened. It's just people leading good lives and showing others the way. You know, you don't have to have a halo around your head. You know, you just live your life, do the best you can, and be a good example to others, and people will follow. That'll be attractive to people. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
anything you guys want to plug, and then I'll put whatever website you want in the video description.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, we have a podcast that we do together called the Synaxis Podcast, where we talk about all manner of things, conspiracies and pop culture, and try to ground it in an Orthodox perspective.
And
then
that's
I
on
also have
YouTube.
Yeah, that's on YouTube. We're working on getting it out on other platforms, but it's mainly on YouTube for now. And then I have another YouTube channel called The Metal Mystic, and that's where I do my my music documentaries about occultism and also grounded in orthodoxy.
They're really good. Check them out.
I'll put both of those links
Awesome.
in the video description. Okay, everybody.
Great. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Josh. God bless you both.
It's been a pleasure.
God bless you.
God bless.